Good morning, everyone. The time is now 1:05, and I will call the March 19th, 2026 Planning Board meeting to order. We have the following board members with us today: Vice Chair Giraldo.
Vote aye.
Commissioner Okoye.
Aye.
Commissioner Matthews.
Aye.
And Commissioner Jenkins.
Aye.
And for the record, I'm Chairman Barnes. Before we get started, I wonder if everyone could help me in welcoming Commissioner Matthews and Jenkins, as this is their first Planning Board meeting. We'll now move on to the business at hand. Please note that the deadline for participation, pre-registration, and for all submission of materials and exhibits was 12 noon on Tuesday before the Planning Board meeting. The order of cases for today's meetings are as follows. Items 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, and 7. First item on the agenda, item 1, the resolution of appreciation for Mr. Greg Gordon. Mr. Gordon is retiring with 28 years of service with MNC PTC Department of Parks and Recreation, Prince George's County. Greg was a leader and served in several management positions, regional manager over Sports, Health, and Wellness Division, Aquatics and Athletic Facilities Division. He was a facilities director in Bladensburg Community Center, Glenarden Community Center, Teresa Banks Memorial Aquatic Center, Allentown Splash and Tennis Center. Greg was instrumental in launching the Teen Coalition program, created the department's first ever competitive swim team. He continued to succeed in MNCPPC Diversity Council. His expertise extended beyond the agency and the region. Earned various aquatic certification as well as professional certifications with National Recreation and Parks Association, recognized as the who's who of top 100 aquatics professionals by Aquatics Magazine. Held several leadership roles with NRPA committees and served on the Board of Trustees for Mid-Atlantic Region and Aquatics Branch. We thank Greg for his commitment to the Commission, the Parks and Recreation industry, and the members' mentorship and development of young professionals. We send him our best wishes into his retirement. If we can put our hands together for Greg. We look for a motion of approval for the resolutions.
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Second, Mr. Chair.
It's been properly moved and second. I will now call the roll. Vice Chair
I
Giraldo.
vote aye.
Commissioner Okoye.
I vote aye.
Commissioner Jenkins.
I vote aye.
Commissioner Matthews.
I vote aye.
And I vote aye as well. Thank you so much. The next item on the agenda is item 2, draft minutes of March 12, 2026 meeting. Look for a motion.
Mr. Chair, I move approval of the minutes of the Prince George's County Planning Board meeting of March 12th, 2026.
Mr. Chair, I second that.
It's been properly moved and second. I will now call the roll. Vice Chair Giraldo.
Vote aye.
Commissioner Okoye.
I vote aye.
Commissioner Jenkins.
I vote aye.
Commissioner Matthews.
I vote aye.
And I vote aye as well.
Mr. Chair, if I could take a minute of personal privilege.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. I'd like to recognize Delissa Coleman, our counsel for today. I want to acknowledge that Ms. Coleman was of having been nominated to become a fellow of the Maryland Bar Foundation. And for those who don't know, the Maryland Bar Foundation is the nonprofit arm of the Maryland State Bar Association that gives grants to other legal services organizations. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
No, thank you, Ms. Coleman, for all the work that you're doing and the difference that you're making here at the commission.
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
3A.
3A.
None.
I need to go to 3C. Right. Let me just say there are no legislative updates on today's agendas for this week. We will now move on to the next agenda item, which is 3,
Consent,
Where's that?
consent agenda, should be there.
we're going to move around a little bit. We're going to go to item 3C, Parks and Recreation item, Historical Agricultural Resource Preservation Program, Mr. Paul Sun.
Okay. Good morning, Chair Barnes and fellow planning board members, and welcome to the new planning board members. For the record, my name is Paul Sun, Land Acquisition Specialist for the Department of Parks and Recreation. You're here today to seek your approval for a partial release on a Historic Agricultural Resource Preservation Program easement. Joining us here today is Janine Nutter from Prince George's Soil Conservation District, who is the HART Program Administrator. Next slide, please. The subject property is in the southern part of the county on the north side of Croom Road, approximately 1/2 mile south of its intersection with the Quasco Road. In 2015, the department, in conjunction with Soil Conservation District, purchased a HARP easement on this 117-acre parcel of land. Next slide, please. In 2018, the property was purchased by Mr. Ricky Goad, another private landowner. The HARP easement is still intact, as it is perpetual binding on the land. Next slide, please. Croom Road is a state-maintained road and managed by the Maryland Department of Transportation. Last July, Maryland State Highway contacted Mr. Goad regarding a partial taking of his property to facilitate improvements on Croom Road, which is a bridge that leads into Charles County. The needed land is 2,830 square feet, or 1/600th of an acre, very minimal. Next slide, please. SHA has provided these appraisals and determined that I'm sorry. As
Mr. Sun,
previously-
I apologize. I need to stop you. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to move us into a closed session pursuant to the general provision articles of the annotated code of Maryland, Article 3-305, subsection B7. A closed session is proposed to consult with counsel to obtain legal advice on impending legislation. Commissioners, their motion.
So move that we go into closed session, Mr. Chair.
I second that, Mr. Chair.
It's been properly moved and second. I will call the roll. Vice Chair Giraldo.
Vote aye.
Commissioner Okoye.
Vote aye.
Commissioner Jenkins.
Vote aye.
Commissioner Matthews.
I vote aye.
And I vote aye as well. We will reconvene in the open session following the executive session meeting. We'll now call the meeting back to order, and we will go back to item 3C, Parks and Recreation item, Historic Agriculture Resource Preservation Program. And we will hear from Paul Sun.
Good afternoon, Chairman Barnes. Do you want me to start from the beginning?
You're on mute. I mean, it's still green. Hold it till it's red, green. There you go.
It's, there you go.
Good afternoon, Chairman Barnes. Would you like me to start over, or do you want
You
to?
start where you left off.
Okay. Next slide, please. One more, please. Yeah, you can go back one more slide, please. Like I said, the State Highway Commission has contacted our owner regarding the construction of this new bridge on Croom Road, and they need this easement and property conveyance from them. Along with that, they need a release, partial release of the HARP easement. SHA has provided appraisals for the area of the HARP easement and determined that it's $100 for the land area needed. Staff finds this a very minimal partial release, as it's less than 1/100% of the 117 acres. And it's a public benefit for building this bridge along Croom Road. So our release of the easement will also allow the owner to convey the property to SHA. DPR staff, along with the Soil Conservation District, recommends the planning board approval of this partial release of the HARP easement on the subject property. This concludes staff's presentation. We're here to answer any questions that you may have.
Are there any questions for Mr. Sun?
I have none.
Seeing none, is there a motion?
Mr. Chair, I move that we adopt the findings of the recommendation of staff with regards to the Historic Resource Preservation Program for the partial release of the easement in Brandywine, Maryland.
Mr. Chair, I second that.
It's been properly moved and second. I will now call the roll. Vice Chair Giraldo,
I vote aye.
Commissioner Okoye,
I vote aye.
Commissioner Jenkins,
I vote aye.
Commissioner Matthews,
I vote aye.
and I vote aye as well. Thank you so much.
Thank
We
you.
will move forward to the consent agenda item, item 4A, draft resolution. Is there a motion?
Mr. Chair, after consideration of the record for item number 4A, I move adoption of the staff findings and approve of the items on the consent agenda in accordance with the recommendations of our staff.
Second.
It's been properly moved and second. I will now call the roll. Vice Chair Giraldo,
Vote aye.
Commissioner Okoye,
Aye.
Commissioner Jenkins,
I vote aye.
Commissioner Matthews,
I vote aye.
and I vote aye as well. Thank you so much. We will move on to the regular agenda items. The first item on the agenda is item 5, Comprehensive Design Plan CDP-9903-05 Oak Creek Club. We will now hear from Ms. Sun.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the Planning Board, and welcome the new board members. For the record, I'm Meng San with the Urban Design section. Item number 5 and 6 are comprehensive design plans, CDP-9902-06 and CDP-9903-05, Oak Creek Club, Development Parcel M, which requests amendment to the approved CDP for an approximately 8-acre portion of the site to increase the permitted residential density in order to allow construction of 28 single-family detached dwelling units within the residential low development and low activity center zones. In a March 17th memorandum to Chairman Barnes, the applicant submitted a request for a continuance of the planning board hearing from March 19th, 2026 to March 26th, 2026 to allow additional time to coordinate with MNCPPC on the applications. Additionally, the applicant submitted a waiver to the 70-day planning board action limit, extending the action limit to March 26, 2026. Staff would like to acknowledge when Exhibit 1 is received from Mr. Cliff Townsend, a homeowner and a former homeowner association board member, which includes 2 pages. This exhibit is germane to the development proposal and will be carried forward to be discussed during the next week's public hearing if this continuance is approved. In conclusion, Urban Design staff recommend that the planning board approve the continuance request and schedule this case for the March 26, 2026 meeting. This concludes staff's presentation. Thank you very much.
Are there any questions from the planning board?
None.
Seeing none, we will hear from the applicant's attorney, Mr. Hatcher.
Good afternoon, members of the planning board. I work with
Mr. Hatcher, my name is Jonathan Martin, a land use attorney for CL Hatcher LLC in Laurel, Maryland. We represent the applicant Carrollton Oak Creek LLC for the CDP amendments. We've submitted, as mentioned by Ms. Sun, we have submitted into the record a request for a continuance of this hearing to March 26, 2026. To allow for additional coordination between the applicant and planning staff on certain elements of the CDP applications. Staff has had an opportunity to review, as mentioned by Ms. Sun, the continuance request and have expressed support of the continuance. In closing, the applicant respectfully requests that the planning board accept staff's recommendation and grant the applicant's continuance request to hold the hearing on March 26, 2026.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Hatcher? Seeing none, and I don't believe anyone is signed up in opposition. Is there a motion?
Mr. Chair, I move that we continue this case, CDP P 49990206 and CDP 9903-05 to the planning board date of March 26th.
I second that, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. It's been properly moved and second. I will call the roll. Vice Chair Giraldo,
Vote aye.
Commissioner Poirier,
Vote aye.
Commissioner Jenkins, Commissioner Matthews,
I vote aye.
and I vote aye as well. Thank you very much. The next item on the agenda is item 6, comprehensive design plan, CDP 9902-06 Oak Creek.
I was about to say, I don't think that you officially opened item 6, so you may want to go ahead and just call this and accept or adopt the presentation for item 5.
Oh, I didn't do item 5?
You did item 5, but
I did item 5 and 6.
Oh, you did item 5 and 6.
Mhm.
So what you want me to do?
open the item 6, adopt the presentation that was heard in the case before it, and then take another vote on
Okay.
item 4 to continue the case.
It's not, it's what help.
I was just trying to get out here sooner. So item 6 is the second one, CDP?
Correct.
Okay. So, Mr. Chair, I move that we continue CDP 9903-06,
9902-06.
02-06 to the date of March 26, 2026.
I second that.
All right, so it's been properly moved and second that we will adopt item 5 and item 6, comprehensive design plan. Is there a motion? It's been properly moved and second. I will now call the roll. Vice Chair Giraldo,
Vote aye.
Commissioner Okoye,
Vote aye.
Commissioner Jenkins, Commissioner Matthews,
I vote aye.
and I vote aye as well. Thank you, Ms. Sun. You did an outstanding job. We will now move on to item 8, Countywide Planning Division FY 26 Historic Property Plan Program Awards Recommendation. We will now hear from staff.
Good afternoon, Chairman Barnes and members of the Planning Board. For the record, I am Daniel Tanna, Planner 3 in the Historic Preservation section. Item 8 on your agenda is the fiscal year 2026 Historic Property Grant Program Award Recommendations. Next slide, please. The program provides grants for preserving, protecting, and enhancing historic properties in the county and is funded through the Planning Department's annual budget. In 2026 is the 17th year of the program, and $5.9 million have been awarded to date. For fiscal year 2026, $250,000 is available to award. Next slide, please. For the fiscal year 2026 grant round, 4 grant workshops were held with a total of 86 registrants, and informational mailings were sent to the owners of historic sites and resources, as well as the county's 27 municipalities. 21 applications were received, 4 of which were determined to be ineligible based on the program guidelines. The 17 eligible applications requested a total of $752,224.84 in funding. Next slide, please. This slide shows the geographic distribution of the 17 eligible applications that were received. Next slide, please. In accordance with the program guidelines, the Historic Preservation Commission Chair appointed a grant committee to evaluate applications using the selection criteria and program guidelines and to provide recommendations to the Historic Preservation Commission. The program criteria are shown on this slide. Next slide, please. This year, the funding requested significantly exceeded the amount of funding available, and because of this, the grant committee focused on fully funding eligible work at properties that have not previously received a historic property grant. The remaining funds were distributed evenly among properties that have not received a grant within the last 4 grant cycles. 2 properties were not recommended for funding either because they proposed using incompatible materials or because the proposed expenses were not sufficiently justified in the application. The grant committee's review resulted in a total of $249,998 in recommended funding distributed among 10 historic properties, along with recommended reallocation instructions for any grants that are withdrawn or terminated before the end of the fiscal year. The Historic Preservation Commission reviewed and concurred with the grant committee's recommendations at its public meeting on February 17th, 2026. On March 5th, 2026, the owner of one property, Fairview, recommended for grant funding, submitted a written request that their grant application be withdrawn from consideration. In accordance with the reallocation instructions recommended by the grant committee and approved by the Historic Preservation Commission, the recommended funding from that $50,000 award was divided equally among the 4 properties that had remaining unfunded eligible work items. This slide shows the updated funding recommendations reflecting that reallocation. The grant committee's recommendation also included the following reallocation instructions. If you could skip to slide number 45,
No, I think it's
please.
the next slide.
Oh, is it the next? Oh, sorry. Thank you, Tom. So the reallocation instructions read that in the event that a grantee terminates their grant award prior to the fiscal year 2026 fiscal year-end deadlines, the forfeited funding should be reallocated evenly among the other partially funded proposals with remaining unfunded eligible work items, which is what has happened now already once. Next slide, please. So on behalf of the Historic Preservation Commission, staff recommends that the Planning Board approve Historic Property Grant Program awards and reallocation instructions for the fiscal year 2026 program year totaling $249,998, distributed among 9 historic properties based on the applications received and the grant committee recommendations. This concludes staff's presentation, and we are happy to answer any questions or provide information on any of the applications if requested.
Thank you. Are there any questions for staff?
I have none, Mr. Chair.
Seeing none, great job as always. But is there a motion?
Mr. Chair, I move that we adopt the staff recommendation and approval of the Historic Preservation Commission's Historic Property Trust Grant Program totaling $249,998.
Second that, Mr. Chair.
It's been properly moved and second. I will now call the roll. Vice Chair Giraldo,
Vote aye.
Commissioner Okoye,
Vote aye.
Commissioner Jenkins,
Vote aye.
Commissioner Matthews,
I vote aye.
and I vote aye as well. Thank you guys so much. We will now move on to the next agenda item, item number 9, Office of the Planning Director, Legislative Drafting Request LDR-24-206. We will now hear from one of my favorite, Ms. Gomez.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the Planning Board. For the record, Natalia Gomez with the Planning Director's Office. Item 9 on the agenda, as the chairman mentioned, is a legislative drafting request, LDR 24-2026. Next slide, please. This is a text amendment request to introduce 3 definitions to section 27-1600, I think. And it's going to introduce essentially 3 words, which are a correctional facility, detention center, and prison. Next slide, please. I actually stated wrong. The section in definitions in the zoning code is 27-2500. So these 3 new definitions will be located in that part. The reason behind this text amendment is to promote consistency in application and enforcement by reducing ambiguity in interpretation. Just to clarify here, Section 27-11001A4 is determines that prisons, detention centers, and correctional facilities are prohibited use in the county unless they are owned or operated by Prince George County. So these definitions will just be introduced in the zoning code, but they are not going to be amended to be all permitted uses, or they're not going to be in any other type of proper introduced use, permitted use. And to clarify, and just to mention, LDR does not create new development entitlements, and again, as I mentioned, it does not amend the land use table uses to make it those three definitions are permitted uses. They will continue as prohibited uses unless, again, operated by the Prince George County. And it does not modify the county's zoning authority or existing exemption structure. This includes also federal projects which are exempted from zoning. So this will be only for anything operated outside county or state or federal level. Next slide, please. And with that, the department recommends support of the LDR, LDR-24-2026, and transmit our comments, finding a staff report to the county council. Thank you. This concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Are there any questions for Ms. Gomez?
So, Ms. Gomez, a question I have, so this would prevent the federal government from constructing any ICE facilities in the
No.
county?
No, Commissioner, because these type of facilities are federal facilities, and we cannot enforce zoning into federal projects.
So there's nothing that there's nothing that could be done by the county council to prevent those facilities from being located in the county?
Up to the extent of this LDR, no, sir. But I can defer to my supervisors for more information about federal facilities in our county.
Yes, sir. For the record, James Hunt, Acting Planning Director. In situations like this, we've recently seen some legislation in adjacent jurisdictions where we're talking about ICE facilities, right? If they are facilities that are primarily owned privately, that's different under those. So you have private facilities and you have those government facilities as well. So that's where the kind of the line is on this one. That would have, if it's a government facility, it had to go through a mandatory referral process, obviously. But these are actually going to be, I think, applicable to those private facilities, I believe. Is that correct? Okay.
Right, correct, yes, this
Okay,
is
so
for private.
it prevents a private correctional center from being located in the county, owned by a private party.
So they're already prohibited.
Okay.
Yeah, private parties are already, it's a prohibited use by default. What
Okay.
this LDR is doing is that clearly defining which facilities are prohibited, because they're already listed but not defined.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I see no one in opposition of this. Is there a motion to support?
Mr. Chair, I move that the planning board support the legislative drafting request of LDR 024-2026.
One second. I'm sorry. Yes, ma'am.
I actually was on the list to speak.
Oh,
And your
sorry.
name?
Hines, H-Y-N-E-S.
Okay, I'm sorry. Come on up. Come on up. Right here, at the podium.
Over here.
Yes, ma'am.
My name's Sarah Hines. I'm from Beltsville, and I am also with Indivisible on the Route 1 corridor, and I'm also here in support of LDR 24-2026. And which of course supports the new definitions of detention centers, correctional facilities, and prisons in Prince George's County. It's important that these facilities are properly categorized so they meet the state standards for care and medical services. Definitions matter as they help the county to effectively manage resources by distinguishing between pretrial and post-conviction needs. Clear definitions prevent the hidden use of facilities for unauthorized purposes like private, profit-motivated detention centers. The county should not have detention centers where people are removed from their homes and are held in these facilities with minimal care and have disappeared without access to the legal system, which they are entitled to. In addition, federal law enforcement in contact with the facility should be trained to the high Maryland law enforcement standards. We acknowledge this would be an unusual zoning requirement, but these are unusual times, and terrible things are happening, and I encourage the board to stretch the limit on what is considered to be a zoning requirement. County residents need to be certain that your zoning requirements are eliminate the possibility of mass detention centers here. These buildings are a means to scare the least of us. As a fellow resident in an immigrant community, I'm speaking on behalf of my own neighbors. I thank you for your support of explicit definitions of these buildings to prevent ICE from being in our county. I also thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much for your statement. Is Greg Smith here? Saying that he's not, is there a motion for approval?
Mr. Chair, I move that we adopt the recommendations of staff with regards to LDR-24-2026.
I second, Mr. Chair.
It's been properly moved and second. I will call the roll. Vice Chair Giraldo.
Vote aye.
Commissioner Okoye.
Aye.
Commissioner Jenkins.
I vote aye.
Commissioner Matthews.
I vote aye.
And I vote aye as well. Thank you all so much. The next item on the agenda is item 7, Countywide Planning Division briefing on fiscal impact of growth study. We will now hear from staff.
Good morning, Chair Barnes, Vice Chair Giraldo, Commissioner Okoye, and welcome Commissioners Matthews and Jenkins to the Planning Board today. We look forward to working with you, and hopefully you will find this briefing informative. For the record, my name is Chad Williams. I'm a master planner with the Countywide Planning Division, and I'm the project manager for the Fiscal Impact of Growth Study. In a few minutes, you'll hear the initial findings and conclusions and recommendations from our consultant team. Just a few things of housekeeping and in the interest of recognizing my colleagues for their hard work. I did want to recognize by name in this introduction Acting Deputy Director Katina Scholars, Marian Hannessy, who's in the audience with us today, Kui Zhao, Supervisor of our Research Section, Bobby Ray, Supervisor of our Public Facility or Special Projects Section, as well as Paul Patnode in our Information Management Division, all of whom have provided much of their professional expertise to the project team to help with getting where we are today. In early 2024, we were asked a relatively simple question by the County Council: is new development paying for itself? And as you will hear, that's a very complicated question. It needs to be looked at from a different perspective, and it involves a lot of analysis, research, and recommendations. So with that setting in mind, I'm going to turn over to Ethan Connor Ross for doing the presentation. And Mr. Chair, for your information, your sign-in sheet will have Ethan, Courtney, and John, who are with us in the room today, as well as Pamela, who is, I believe, available online. They're all part of the project team, for your information.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much.
Mhm.
Wait, I'm here. There we go. Thank you, Chad, for that introduction, and Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chairman, Commissioners. Very pleased to be here today to speak to you about the study, and we'll introduce our team in a couple of slides here as part of our overview of the project. If we could start on the next slide, I just wanted to go over quickly the structure of the presentation here today. We want to review first an explanation of the study, the key questions and goals that we set out to answer, the process that we've gone through in order to do so. The project is currently in draft form, so we do have key findings and recommendations to present today. They are not finalized and submitted yet, but we are here to discuss them with the Planning Board and look forward to any questions and feedback that you have. Next slide, please. So we'll start with a review of the study, and the next slide shows the project team and project roles that we've assembled. If we can get the next one, please. I'm Ethan Connor Ross, for the record, with eConsult Solutions. We are an economics policy consulting firm based out of Philadelphia. I'm one of the principals with the firm, and I am the eConsult is the economic and fiscal analysis lead on the project. We are also the prime contractor, handling project management, handling deliverables. Here today with my two colleagues, and I'll have them introduce themselves, starting with Courtney.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you for having us. I'm Courtney Powell. I'm with WGI, which is a national multidisciplinary engineering and planning firm, and I'm based just right across the river there in Arlington. But our role on this project is leading the infrastructure analysis component.
Good afternoon. John Stover, managing partner of John Stover and Associates. We're based in DC. We're an economic development consulting firm, do a ton of work across the country, across the region, and have done a lot of work within the county as well. We were focused primarily on the economic development incentive tools, TIFs, and pilot programs.
Welcome.
So the next slide, as we move forward here, lays out the key questions that the study addresses about growth. As Chad noted, at one level it's a simple question, but at another there's many questions and much analysis obviously sitting within this. So we've looked at historic patterns of growth and the degree to which development in the past has impacted revenue generation and expenses and the balance between the two. We've asked that same question forward-looking. Anticipated growth, how is that going to affect real estate development and in turn county revenues and expenditures? And as my colleagues will talk about, we've also looked at these other facets of the issue. What does it mean for infrastructure adequacy and level of service that the county is providing and the cost to do so? And then how do development incentives fit into this picture, and how can they be used really to encourage growth patterns that align with the county's planning goals and some of the fiscal components that we're seeing? The next slide breaks down some of the kind of models and process that we have used to get there. Basically, we have built on the top row here a fiscal model that allows us to evaluate fiscal implications on both the revenue and the cost side, looking backwards and then projecting fiscal outcomes going forwards. And then at the same time, we have done a policy review of the APF policies related to infrastructure, of those policies related to development incentives, and we have looked both how they're working in the county and then at some peer best practices and some other locations that my colleagues will talk about to kind of inform all of this really future-looking, informing future decisions around fiscal policy, land use, infrastructure, and planning in the county. We want to be clear upfront about what the study is not. It is not an internal audit or evaluation of agency policies, county policies, et cetera. It is not establishing a future budget, nor is it establishing specific growth targets, recommending development approaches. It is meant to be information to inform policy making by this board, by others in the county, rather than provide any constraints or specific budget. Next slide, please. Just a little more on process. We've got, because of the structure of this, essentially a backward-looking and a forward-looking approach to all of these key topics. So, along the left side, you can see that the key issues that we have gotten into, and we'll review them in our findings here. And in each case, essentially, backward-looking, what has been happening in the county, what are the policies in place, and then forward-looking, both recommendations for improvement, projections around development, and then ultimately this fiscal impact, backward-looking and forward-looking, based on population and employment projections coming down from the regional COG. The next slide has a little more process and limitations that we did want to acknowledge about the study. Data are analyzed at the countywide level. We've got results there, and then we have broken it down by council district where possible, and where spatial data was available. We've used a whole lot of different data sets for this, federal data, county data, public budgets. We have met with departments and also reviewed certainly planning studies of the county and its various entities. We do want to acknowledge that data availability was a limitation for some analyses that we went into the study anticipating being able to perform. All of our teams work in various counties, various jurisdictions around the country. There were data sets we asked for that we expected to potentially be tracked and were not able to get a hold of or did not find were tracked systematically And so some of our recommendations are actually going to be about data tracking and things of a process nature, in addition to, some policy things. And finally, just that the report is in draft form now, is currently under review by staff, and that is the status.
Excuse me for a minute. What was the problem of not finding enough data availability for the transportation?
Sure, Courtney, you want to address that?
Yes, so in terms of the transportation, we had some discussions that there is, from a vehicular standpoint, there's data around that, but where there was some more challenge or just not the breadth of data there is in the non-vehicular transportation, so bike, pedestrian.
Okay, thank you.
So let me ask another question then. We have the largest number of transit-oriented stations in Prince George's County. And what's your findings on that?
That is actually a great question.
Yeah, I know.
So let me, so about, let's see, 656 acres are out of the county land are located within those transit-oriented areas.
Say that again then?
656 acres of county land is located within those transit-oriented areas.
Okay. So I'm trying to understand your response.
So, and perhaps this is a question we can take a number of different ways. I think from a sort of a development standpoint and the impact of those transit centers on growth patterns, we will talk a little bit about that. The planning areas were kind of one of the lenses that we use to look at different land typologies, which we will speak about. A large portion of the commercial development in the county and a large portion of the multifamily development in the county has been in those areas, which I think is in accordance with kind of planning policy and areas that are able to handle density and makes a lot of sense from a fiscal standpoint. The single family and to a degree the kind of in between row homes and duplexes are largely outside of those planning areas, and that obviously is going to have implications as well, which we'll get into a bit as we go here.
Yeah, because I'm just curious as to the study, right? With 15 transit-oriented stations, and that's one of the primary focuses that we have is to develop around those stations. And looking at the economic impact that the county is having right now, and the number of employees that work in the federal government. And because of the latest shutdown, layoff, DOGE cuts, and the number of federal employees that work for Prince George's County, how does those things impact the development around those transit-oriented stations is really concerning for me, which I am hoping that through your study that provides some insight as to the thinking of what we're doing. Also looking at the number of land that the county has and looking at redeveloping in that land. I had a conversation with our county executive who wants to transform Prince George's County. But what does that really mean? So I am hoping that your study breaks down for me and for her what that really means as far as transforming the county. So as I look through your presentation, I am still trying to find the why or the answer to some of these questions.
Sure. Well, would you like us to kind of step into the findings and try to kind of address that question as we go, or?
I don't want to mess up your flow because
Sure.
you seem like you're on a roll, but
No,
I just want to make sure that we're hitting the necessary points for me anyway.
No, and those are absolutely valid questions. I guess, one other kind of process limitation that we do want to acknowledge, we've used projections from the COG that are about a year or two old, and, taken them down to specific land areas, et cetera. Obviously, it's been an eventful year, as you alluded to, in terms of, some of the job reductions of the federal workforce, in terms of some of the large-scale properties in Prince George's County, the Six Flags, et cetera, the issues with the stadium. So, we understand that any projection that's out there is not going to be perfectly achieved. Circumstances are going to change over 10 years. Part of what we're trying to do with this study is look at different typologies of land uses based on the residential or commercial type that's going there, based on the density, the planning area, the TOD infrastructure, and try to figure out kind of the fiscal profile of those, where some may be more favorable comparing revenues and expenses than others, and kind of provide that as a planning tool Because, you know, I don't think anyone should take those projections as a given, right? That's exactly how development is going to proceed. So part of the function of this is to try to arm, you know, this planning board, the county, the council with some sort of neutral information, technical information on how to make those decisions in ways that are fiscally beneficial.
Yeah, because I go back, the governor of the great state of Maryland has asked that we develop roughly 22,000 new homes here in Prince George's County. Looking at the landscape, if you will, and trying to make that happen, whether that's through single-family homes, townhomes, detached homes, duplexes, whatever the case may be. I am hoping your study gives me a roadmap on how we're going to make that happen, especially when I start looking at the economic landscape of this county. Looking at our 3 largest parcels of land right now, and Six Flags, Morgan Boulevard, and the Commander site, it is how do we spur economic development and growth to sustain this county and to grow it in a real thoughtful and methodical way.
Yeah.
Looking at the number of people that live in Prince George's County that are now migrating to southern Maryland, how do we now compete against those things through your study? So I listen, I am encouraged by what you all put together. I just want to make sure that we are really diving into the minutia of the true growth of this county in a way that makes us all start thinking outside of the box, right? Because if we're really trying to move the needle forward, I am also looking at our 27 municipalities. And I've said 1,001 times, each municipality should reflect the history and the culture of each municipality, that they should look differently. My job, our goal, is to turn Prince George's County into a destination for the nation. So how do we do that in a thoughtful way? You guys are the subject matter experts. That's why you're coming before us to give us that roadmap or some insight as how do we get there from a historical standpoint.
So your point is well taken, and I think, you know, with your permission, we'd love to jump into some of the findings here, start to get into some of the data, try to answer it as we go. I know John will have some thoughts from kind of the economic development incentives lens.
I've been waiting to hear from John.
There you go. We will get to him shortly. Unfortunately, I'm up here for a few more before I get to turn it over to my colleagues. So thank you, Commissioner. So the next slide is just a pivot to the key findings portion, and on the one that follows, we have tried to ground ourselves as much as we can. If you could go to the next slide, please, in historic patterns before we kind of move into the future placing planning. And we have placed on here maps over the decade that we analyzed of population change on the left, population density in the middle, median home value on the right. One of the things that, you know, would really describe this in our view overall, this is a very nuanced pattern. There is not a simple relationship, you know, in this county between, you know, all of the development is happening in either dense or not dense locations, high income locations versus low income. There are kind of different patterns and dynamics in different parts of the county, which importantly have different relationships with the commute shed to Washington, the commute shed to other counties in Maryland. So it does require, as we walk through these, potentially differentiated strategies for different locations. On the slide that follows, we look at population change across, again, this 10-year period. And just to give you a guide to how some of these tables work, we go vertically down data for each of the council districts, and then the county data at the far right there in terms of this 10-year period, and then horizontally in different categories. We're showing here population change, which went up by about 70,000 over this 10-year period, growth of about 8%. One of the things that's really notable here, almost all of that growth, 47,000 of the 70,000, is concentrated in the elderly population, which certainly is a national trend, certainly has to do with a lot of demographics, but is particularly pronounced here that the school-age population was virtually flat, working-age population up only a small amount, and a lot of growth in the elderly. The next slide goes through household characteristics that are associated with this same set of kind of population change. The number of households increased by 16% compared to an 8% increase in population. And what that's telling us sort of by mathematical necessity the average household size is getting smaller. So more housing units needed, kind of per population, is another way to think about that. And that is also associated with population aging and some of the other factors going on. The owner-occupied share of housing is 62%. There is pretty significant variation if you look horizontally between different council districts. At the extreme end, Council District 9, 92% homeowner occupied, and then Council District 2 is actually majority renter. So you see different pockets of that throughout the county. And then the other thing I would point out in terms of kind of the basic demographics here.
If you can go back to that.
Sure.
Why do you think that's the case?
Well, those areas are very different in terms of, inner ring suburbs and their proximity to the city relative to areas that were, at the extreme kind of southeast of the county that were ultimately kind of greenfield and have been developed more recently in, subdivisions and sort of a single-family pattern that, lends itself very differently to kind of when that was built out, when the housing stock went into place. And you see, as a correlate of that, very different income levels, very different kind of population demographics, in those different locations.
Yeah, I think it speaks more to inside the Beltway and outside of the Beltway. I think demographics, racial profile, all of those things play a reason as to, one, why population is more homeowners and the other ones are renters. I think, the economic status of those inside and outside play a big difference as well. So I'm looking for more in-depth of those types of reasoning, which then helps us formulate a focused area of potential growth or that impact.
Yeah. No, that makes sense, and we see significantly different development patterns, which we'll get into. Inside, outside the Beltway is a good way to put it, but certainly in various districts that have different characteristics, different types of residential and commercial housing, or residential development and commercial development taking place.
Okay.
The other thing that we wanted to note here, these median home value changes and median income changes, these are expressed in real terms, above and beyond inflation. So median incomes did increase in real terms by 7%, but real home values went up 3 times that much. So, from one standpoint, homeowners did well, but from a housing affordability standpoint, you can really see that challenge. And again, that's not only in this county, but the cost and value of housing going up significantly more than incomes over the past 10 years. Our next slide looks at commuter flows, and this is really an important indication of kind of what's driving that population and workforce picture. Prince George's County is a net outflow county, meaning that there are more workers who live in this county but work elsewhere than there are folks that come into Prince George's for work, which I'm sure is not a surprise. That has been the case over time. Net outflow of about 110,000, almost identical to what it was a decade ago. And obviously, Washington, D.C., Montgomery County, some of the southern Maryland counties are kind of key outflows. This does vary by council district and area of the county as well, which we thought was interesting. We've done on the right a ratio between the number of residents who are employed in the district and then the number of jobs actually located in that district, with a number greater than 1 indicating, it's an outflow district in a sense. And some of these districts, District 9, District 7, District 2, have numbers of, 2 or 3 times as many workers living there as actually folks that actually work there. So the characteristics of what kind of commercial activity is happening there, what kind of communities those are obviously affected by a lot of folks working outside of the district itself.
Let me ask you another question, and I apologize for.
No, it's fine.
Because I can't wait to pick on him.
Yep.
When you start talking about the commuter flow, I would be curious as to, I know that we have more people leaving out to go to work, but have you all drilled down as to the types of jobs that they're actually going to? Once again, for me, it helps the findings to show what types of businesses that we should be attracting to Prince George's County.
Yeah.
Right? It's one thing to say that 110,000 of your residents are leaving every day. That doesn't tell me anything.
Yeah.
Right? The story is 110,000 people are leaving because they're leaving for more professional jobs that are in the field of accounting, blah, 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 whatever, versus those types of businesses or sectors right here in Prince George's County. So if we start attracting those types of businesses to stay in Prince George's County, there do I say that number of 110 now goes down to maybe $50,000, right? Or 50,000 people.
Sure.
And then with 50,000 people staying, now my tax rate goes up because now they're spending their money for lunch and other things in the county. So now that's helping my bottom line is from a tax standpoint. And that gives me now broader conversations with our Economic Development Corporation to say, here are the type of businesses that we need to start attracting in the county, because now our residents that were leaving, now I can now start to say, I'm gonna get folks from Virginia, Montgomery County, and Washington, D.C. to come here because now I have these businesses here.
Yeah. And we will get into the value of commercial land use from a fiscal standpoint. You know, that's absolutely right. We do have additional information in the report, and I will emphasize, we've got about 30 slides here. It's a pretty dense presentation, obviously. The report.
I'm not going through all 30 though.
Well, we're about halfway. The report is, you know, it's hundreds of pages. It's many tables. So each slide that you see here, you know, there are layers beneath it. When we look at employment, you know, this is the commuter flow. We will have breakdowns of the type of industries that they work in, et cetera. But absolutely, one of the takeaways here, and you know, I think anyone that looks at fiscal impact of land use, commercial tends to have a very positive, both in terms of the revenue side and then the services that are provided. You know, they're not nothing. Obviously, there's public safety implications, infrastructure, but it's not generating school children. It's not generating some of those other costs that are associated with residential. So, so that is a positive land use. Couple more, and then we will get to my colleagues here. We broke on the next slide here. If you could flip, we built up different attributes into essentially typologies in order to start to get into our fiscal analysis of what are different types of parcels, different types of planning areas, different types of uses, meaning from this sort of fiscal lens of the study. So we've looked at the property type. We've looked at the development intensity there. What is the characteristics in terms of a subdivision, in terms of infill, and then we have looked at those growth policy areas as a way to kind of classify and categorize the fiscal picture. On the next slide, we've broken the residential developments into single-family, townhouse, and multifamily over the past 10 years. The reference that was alluded to about 22,000 units, there were 28,000 units produced in this 10-year period. But you do see a lot of variation between between parts of the county in what kind of units were being built. So districts 1 through 5, all a majority multifamily in terms of the number of units that are produced, and then a different story elsewhere in the county. Particularly District 9 is heavily towards single-family units. Townhomes actually pretty consistent through different portions of the county, can be built kind of in different contexts, which was an interesting takeaway as well.
May I ask a question quickly?
Yeah, of course.
And maybe you have this in one of your many tables somewhere, but do you have this broken out by, like, sort of timeline? Like, did we see a surge in when, you know, these developments occurred, or will we see that somewhere? Because I'm curious about that.
That's a great question. I think that information is available. I'm not positive if we have kind of that exact cut in the report. It's something that we could look at adding, because yes, there were absolutely kind of cycles over time. I believe a lot of the townhome development happened kind of in the back half of that 10-year period, but I don't want to speak too much of it without the numbers in front of me. Yeah.
Good job, Commissioner.
Yeah. Next slide, please. Here we've got the non-residential side of the equation in terms of, and this is in square footage rather than units, the thousands of square feet that were produced in terms of commercial, industrial, and other types of non-residential development over this time. And again, you do see variation between the different districts. On the right, we've looked at these planning areas and kind of the crosswalk between transit districts, other types of planning centers, and outside. And we had this discussion a little bit earlier. But 93% of single-family housing during this period was produced outside of any of the centers, 68% of townhomes. When you look at multifamily, you're getting more of that production within those regional transit districts, and certainly more on the commercial side as well. So definite variety between the types of land uses in terms of whether they're sort of in those planning areas aligned with the transportation infrastructure or built further afield. And that finally is my cue. all of this obviously has infrastructure implications, and I'll turn it over to Courtney to jump into that.
Thank you, Ethan, and I apologize first, Chairman Barnes, that you're gonna have to wait just a few more slides before it gets to John over here. Best for last.
'Cause I got a whole bunch of questions for him.
Next slide, please. So while they were going down the path of kind of understanding what's happening from the fiscal standpoint and development, we were looking at and trying to understand the adequate public facility process and standards in the county. And so that really started with reviewing the subdivision regulations, which is subtitle 24 of the county code. And as we were kind of getting into what that story is, we were also looking at peer jurisdictions, specifically Howard and Montgomery counties, to kind of see, you know, what seems to be happening, not just, you know, here in Prince George's County, but, you know, nearby and in the state too. And so then we really wanted to look at what is that current understanding of your infrastructure capacity as it relates to your adequate public facility level of service, and what those triggers are, and whether or not current development growth is keeping pace, or the infrastructure is keeping pace with that current growth. And then ultimately that would be leading into looking in the future to 2033 with the assumptions that those conditions of no changes in facilities for fire, police, or changing in staffing, but those same kind of level of service thresholds still remain, and how does that respond to increase in different types of development and the increase in population over the years, and how that would withstand it over time. Next slide, please. So the standard categories for the adequate public facility include parks and recreation, police, fire and rescue, school, and water and sewer. And so for parks and recreation, I'll just point out a couple key facts here of the findings. But as previously mentioned, and apologies, I kind of misinterpreted the initial question, but 656 acres are located within those transit-oriented activity center. And then obviously the rest of the area is within other zones of the county. The police, the level of service thresholds there is for a 10-minute emergency response time and a 25-minute non-emergency response time. There were, I think, like two divisions that slightly exceeded the emergency LOS response time, but none were exceeding the non-emergency of 25 minutes. Fire and rescue, those thresholds are a 4 and 8 minute drive time from each station. About 18% are within a 4-minute response time. That's 18% of the land area, and 56% is within an 8-minute response time. For schools, we base this off of the most recent pupil yield study, which is 2024 to 2025. And we found that about 13% of schools are currently overutilized, meaning that they're exceeding the county's utilization rate, and that is 105% utilization. And then lastly, water and sewer. More than half of the county is located in a sustainable growth tier of 1 and 2, which does allow most types of subdivision development. Under 2% is in Tier 3, where the development is limited and relies on on-site systems. And then just under 32% is in the Tier 4, where development is highly restricted. Next slide, please. Thank you. So as you know, as we kind of talked at the beginning of this presentation, there were some constraints with the data. and not necessarily anything, it kind of leads more to some of the policy considerations. And I think the role of this infrastructure, kind of understanding the current adequacy of the infrastructure, is looking at, are there other ways to track or the thresholds for level of service standards? And so I think a lot of our findings kind of come from that, of depending on what kind of development you're going to be seeing, maybe we need to, consider looking at different thresholds than traditional development. So kind of already touched upon the non-vehicular transportation data. There was little there for us to obtain in order to kind of project something. The fire and EMS, we did have to remain at a high level because the data there was limited. And then do want to point out that even though we talk about water and sewer, which is in the subdivision regulations, it's not classified as a adequate public facility, and it's really reviewed primarily on whether or not it's in a service area, but not looking at the capacity or how many gallons are being used or available. And so I'll just kind of wrap up here that based on these things, looking at a formal APF review committee and timeline to regularly reassess standards and kind of developing these measurable LOS standards, would be recommended. I think just given how fast things change and the types of development, and making sure that these thresholds are, they're being measured apple to apple as best as possible. And creating a formal process track to track the housing unit types. When we dove into the pupil yield study, the capacity thresholds for the school is based on single-family, multifamily, townhouse developments, but there is kind of just a standard number there that is used to project what the capacity is of the schools. But if there is a record and kind of tracking more specifically of what is actually happening on the county's ground, of how many units of multifamily have been built or are in the pipeline, you'll be able to more accurately kind of dial in what that threshold is and utilization of that particular school for that school age. And then last but not least, looking at the fire police to incorporate maybe the staffing ratios as a LOS threshold. Okay, I think, is it time now? Is it?
All right. Well, afternoon, Chairman Barnes, Vice Chairman, Commissioners. So yeah, let's talk TIFs and pilots. Happy to, I have 3 slides, happy to kind of give the backdrop and then answer questions, or obviously feel free to interrupt me and at any point. So the charge here was really to look into the county's kind of more preeminent economic development incentive tools, tax increment financing or TIFs, and payment in lieu of taxes or pilots, and see, answer the question, are they working, and are there opportunities to help kind of refine the programs to help support goals in terms of future growth. The methodology involved reviewing existing policies, looking into how the tools have been applied in recent years, looking into case studies within the county, and then best practices also from across the country. And in short, they're working, right? So since 2004, there's been 16 approved and authorized TIFs. Within those TIFs, land values have doubled, helping to generate $2.2 billion of additional assessed value.
If you can, because I have some new commissioners,
Sure.
can you explain to them what a TIF is?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. So it is a way of financing a development project that would otherwise not be possible. And what it does is it locks in the assessed property tax rates for a property. And then as the assessed values increase, that what is called increment, that tax increment is used to pay off the debt or the bond to fund the initial infrastructure to make the project possible. Sometimes it kind of works in the flip, where you have a TIF district that generates increment over time, and then that's used to pay for a project, so not necessarily debt. But that's the gist, and actually part of this presentation too, we'll get into some more of the specifics of the norms of other elements in TIFs that are sometimes applied here in the county, but not as kind of lockstep with kind of traditional structure of TIFs that you see in not every jurisdiction across the country, but with most jurisdictions across the country.
And can you tell them what TIF means?
Yep, and that's just tax increment financing. So that's just the acronym for TIF. And then I'll answer the same question because it's a really good question. Payment in lieu of taxes is really a tax abatement. So that is a negotiated tax rate for a certain term or period of time for a landowner. And so there's been, TIFs within the last 20 years brought in 16 million square feet of commercial uses that most likely would not have occurred if not for the TIF, have brought in 9,000 residential units and have been applied all throughout the county, not just in kind of transit priority locations. And then 58 pilots have been approved since 2010. These have been predominantly more clustered within the Beltway and more TOD areas. And a large portion of the pilot programs that have been approved have gone towards enabling affordable housing projects to be built. The tool within the county can be used more broadly, and occasionally it brings in kind of a broader either mixed-use development to help bring in the Trader Joe's and College Park. It can be used to kind of bring a community benefit. It can be used to attract key employers, but a large majority of its use in the county to date has been affordable housing. And then if we jump to the next slide.
I've got a question. So
yes,
what does the county need to do, whether laws or otherwise, to encourage supermarkets in the food deserts?
That if there is a one-sentence answer to that, actually, we're doing grocery feasibility studies all throughout the country. There's a number of things. A lot of it is just where do people want to shop. A lot of it is demographics, especially having cars for most groceries. You need just a certain amount of shoppers that are going to go to that location, that have a car that can do it. So that's the really the big one. But so the best way to do it.
If you have a location.
Yeah.
Right? And the people have the cars.
Yep.
If it's not there, they're not going there, right?
So there's kind of two ways to incentivize, right? If you have a gap of where something's not happening, one way is to have more population, right? Encourage growth, have more demand for a grocery store. And the other is to incentivize or to cut costs, right? So if a grocery says, we don't think that we can operate and create the profit right now. And grocery stores, like many other, the margins are paper thin. It's really, really hard to operate. It's a lot of risk, hard to operate a grocery store. So that's where something like a pilot can help incentivize that, where then the property owner, maybe it's the grocery store, maybe it's probably a third party, can say, okay, well, we're paying less now, so we can drop your rent even below what kind of the market rate would be, and that can help kind of save enough cost to enable something like a grocery store. But that's been a huge tool in the county, right? Whole Foods actually was TIF largely enabled, so definitely both TIFs and pilots have been a driver of a number of bringing in key grocery stores to the county.
And what about, for example, I know, for example, with Trader Joe's, their bottom line is affected a lot by whether or not they can sell beer and wine.
Oh, that's huge. Yeah.
It's crucial, isn't it?
Yeah. And you could broaden that to entertainment, recreation, restaurants. So much of the margins, obviously, on alcohol is so much better that, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And so, yep, oh, perfect, thank you. So main takeaways and how we'll kind of talk through the implications here. This slide, I'm just gonna kind of say, here's the big findings that we found, and then the next slide will be the kind of implications for strategic action. So on the TIF front, we found that the has not been consistency in terms of the evaluation process, the approval process that's really changed over time and across projects, which can make it difficult for both, especially EDC staff is the department that presides over that. But it can also make it, it creates a perceived lack of clarity or uncertainty that can make it difficult for the development community to even understand what the tool is, when it can be applied, if that can be relevant to what they're looking to do. And the county, kind of back to the data front, the county does not currently maintain a central database of past TIF performance or outcomes, and that can make evaluation or knowledge transfer more difficult. So how we got all this information was just to look through the OpenGIS data for all the properties, what happened before the TIF, what happened after the TIF. That's not an easy thing to do to track, and it is a best practice to really evaluate and be more transparent and deliberate about what has transpired. Is this program working, and continue to kind of refine it over time, and then that helps also signal to the marketplace when a particular project or idea is right for this type of tool, and then they can engage EDC.
And how
more
many
collectively.
TIFs have we used so far?
16 over the last 20 years. And importantly, only one in the last 9 years. So it's really kind of fallen off as a tool in terms of how much it's been used in
And
recent
there's
years.
no data collected on that?
No, not in the central repository, no.
All right, we'll see if we can change that. And we're using a TIF to lure the spear here, as you know.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
so it is definitely a necessary tool to attract these types of.
That's a perfect, and we'll get to this, but if there's a fundamental difference that I would impart between how a TIF is typically used and how a pilot is typically used, and I will say in the county, they've been used pretty interchangeably, and that's not that happens other places as well. That's not, alarm bells, but really a TIF is all about creating catalytic impact, doing something where you've created something that if it increased land values on site, increasing land values and development viability off-site to such an extent where the county that investment is getting repaid to the county. So theoretically, there should be no limit to how many TIFs you can implement. It's a math problem, right? So that's a great way, and right now it's as challenging as ever to build so many different things, but something that's catalytic like the sphere is, to my mind, probably, given the context, that a no-brainer in terms of helping to enable that happen and the repay back. A pilot, on the other hand, most of the time, especially if you're talking about affordable housing, isn't something that's going to repay itself in terms of tax revenues, but that's not the conceit. The conceit for a pilot is, what is a community benefit that is just good for the county and for the residents of the county? How do we make sure that continues to be attracted and enabled when it's something that can't happen by right? So that could be a grocery store, that could be a major employer, that could be affordable housing. How do we make sure that we're enabling that to happen? But those oftentimes can have a negative impact in terms of the fiscal performance long-term of those particular sites. They don't necessarily have a catalytic impact on the
Has a
surrounding
TIF
uses.
and a pilot been used at the same time on the same project?
Yeah, yes, they have. Like New Carrollton, I know there's all sorts of TIF and pilot intermingled. I don't know if it's necessarily exactly the same. I think probably even within the TIF district. But yeah, so they can certainly be used as complementary tools.
Sorry, just a clarifying question here. So we've had one TIF in the last 9 years.
That's correct.
Okay, so then we have that one data point to sort of go off of and see like how it's success or.
Yeah, and that's, is it Miller? The branch crossing. Yeah, thank you. But so we looked at the other, since 2004, kind of the full gamut of 16 TIFs that have been used. But yeah, in recent years, yeah, that's the only. And then there's also potentially the opportunity to align TIFs with particular strategic objectives, right? Of saying, here's, we particularly want to apply it or use it or incentivize it in whether it's TOD or certain kind of growth locations. On the pilot front, again, it's been a really critical tool for bringing in affordable housing. We've brought in 58 projects, over 7,500 affordable housing units. It's helped bring in over 15,000 overall housing units. But as with the TIFs, they've been implemented on a pretty kind of case-by-case basis. So there's some good with that. Like having flexibility and being, kind of being iterative with it is good. But however, again, this can lead to a lack of clarity or certainty, and then it's a little more difficult to compare then outcomes across projects if it's kind of a different, implemented different each time. Another finding that we found is the length of the terms for pilots in Prince George's County can be unusually long. And the implications of that is you're not getting revenue for an even longer period of time. With affordable housing, sometimes the kind of financing requirements, you really need to have that locked in low rate for 30 years. But it is rare in other jurisdictions to have a term longer than 30 years for housing. And typically, if it's commercial, it's more of like 5, 10, 15-year term for a pilot. In the county, maybe close to like half of the pilots have a term of between 30 and 40 years. And then there's some instances that are 98 years, 99 years for pilots.
Who the hell made that decision?
I don't know, a sweet talking developer, I don't know.
But by the time, so if you have a pilot that long, by the time it gets ready to collect revenue, the building is useless.
Right. That's right.
That's my point.
So, and if we jump to the next slide, so there's 4 main kind of types of findings that really apply to both TIFs and pilots. And what those are is, A, establishing a very clear and specific purpose for that. When is this used? And just being very deliberate about that. Number 2 is setting a clear set of parameters as to when a project is eligible, so that, whether it is the planning board yourselves, whether it's planning staff, whether it's EDC, whether it's a county council member, whether it's a private property owner or a developer, everybody should be on the same page of like looking at the fine print and saying, okay, this either is or isn't eligible for a program. Number 3 is refining the review and approval process. And then number 4 is on the data and transparency and clarity point of collecting data and being able to evaluate the performance and effectiveness of these programs. So on the clear purpose, I can hear Commissioner Jenkins to your point about kind of what exactly, how does a TIF work? Now I'm going to get even more a little bit in the weeds. So it is typically used to fund an infrastructure project that meets 2 specific objectives. And by infrastructure, it's typically either stormwater, utilities, parking structure, access, kind of anything kind of within a very broad umbrella of infrastructure. But it needs to do 2 things. It needs to enable a type of real estate development that could not occur but for, and that kind of but for in quotes is like the term that always is linked with the TIF. So you need that amount of subsidy to bridge the gap of what can happen. So that's A. And then B, the completion of the project needs to bring in enough property value on site and on the surrounding sites that creates that property tax increment, right? So now property values are higher, so now more revenues are coming to the county and to either the general fund eventually and to the TIF fund to repay the initial investment, so that the initial bond or investment can be repaid. So that is a very typical, and again, there's maybe times when you don't need to hit all those notes, but it is absolutely best practice where you need to hit these check marks. And if you hit those check marks, the TIF should be approved because that is now a benefit for the county and can be repaid. So more specifically, it should fund infrastructure linked with enabling a particular project. It should demonstrate the ability to pay the initial cost with increment. It should demonstrate a positive future value, or at least break even, have a neutral fiscal impact. There's an opportunity to be more deliberate about what types of projects, locations, and land uses, et cetera, we want to prioritize and direct the use of TIFs. And again, there's really an opportunity to have a more kind of clear and consistent application of that process, and be able to track the outcomes of the data in a public way. And it's not every project happens. Not every project is that positive return on investment. That's not something to be ashamed of. That's everywhere. But being able to track that holds the program accountable, holds especially the developers accountable for doing what's said, and then helps refine and tweak the program to be more and more impactful in the future. Similarly with pilots, what we would call for in terms of the really clear definition and use case in the county would be to support and enable desired real estate development that, again, would not be feasible but for that type of tax reliefs. And it should be used especially for kind of really one of three things: affordable housing, attracting a major employer that's bringing jobs to the county, or attracting some other really clear public benefit to the community. And again, very similarly to TIFs, we would recommend a clear, structured approval process, accepted on a rolling basis, where we're kind of tracking outcomes. And again, really investigating the term length. The typical term length for an affordable housing project should probably be 20 to 30 years, probably most of them at 30 years. And then on the commercial side, 5 to 10, maybe 15 years, but kind of rein in the term of our pilots.
Very good.
Any further?
You on the roll?
Oh, nice. I thought I thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Great. So if we can go to the next slide, we're going to close with just a few on kind of how we're looking at future development, and then kind of pulling this together from a fiscal standpoint. So what you see on the screen is the development scenario that we've come up with sort of for the purpose of the fiscal analysis in this report. We've taken the Metro Washington COGS cooperative forecasts of population, of employment as the starting point, and not only at a sort of a broad level, but geographically within the traffic analysis zones at a more fine-grained level, and translated those to development scenarios that are consistent with both hitting those population and employment parameters, and then consistent with the spatial patterns, the type of development that's been happening in those locations. So kind of by definition, the future scenario is relatively similar to what we've seen in the past. It implies about 32,000 units over this 10-year period compared to 28,000 over the previous 10 years. And it does weight a little bit more towards multifamily developments compared to single family, based on where those forecasts are kind of putting additional housing and additional population, and the implication that for housing to happen in those areas would be better suited kind of to multifamily. So I do want to say this is not necessarily an economically driven projection of, hey, this is what market conditions support, this is what economic growth supports. These are driven by, really from the population side, what kind of housing development would align with, would meet those population scenarios, which are, I should say, in part constrained by capacity. The land availability capacity is one of the inputs in that model that the county helps provide as part of the cooperative forecast. So that's the scenario we're working off of, and we've translated that kind of from an infrastructure standpoint as well. If you go to the next slide, please, and I'll have Courtney kind of talk about that lens on this future scenario.
Can I ask a quick question
Yeah,
on
of
that
course.
last slide?
Yeah.
Specifically around districts 2 and 3. I just think it's a little interesting that there's nothing at all for single family. Does
Yeah.
that mean that they have sort of like maxed out on their opportunity based on like population and just trying to understand, like,
Yeah.
nothing seems interesting.
Yeah, we looked backwards at where what kind of development had been happening. We looked at kind of where those opportunities are. Obviously, the number in practice might not end up being 0, but we essentially made a decision that it was most reasonable to kind of allocate all of that growth that's being projected in population to those other housing types. Yeah. If you could go to the next one, please.
All right, so coming back to the infrastructure side, this really kind of tells the story of what you would anticipate. If population is growing, development is growing, there's going to be a need for infrastructure as well. All the stuff underground in the public facility safety side of things, there's just more demand, more need for that. And so this chart here, it's color coded to kind of highlight what districts and what adequate public facility has a improvement need. So the lighter the color, the lower the need, meaning either it's keeping pace with growth with the current capacity, or maybe it's starting to go above that threshold. And then the darker that blue-green color, meaning it needs the most improvement, signaling that the greatest growth need is there, or triggering, again, that threshold, there is a larger gap there, seeing that pressure. And so, you know, I think as we talked about, each district in the county as its own, you know, each kind of has its own story, and depending on the demographics and what kind of development is going to happen there, the same holds true here on what districts are going to experience some needs versus the different adequate public facilities. The one that mainly stands out is District 6, and the reason for that is it's experiencing the greatest growth, but it's also tripping and having the greatest delta in going above the level of service threshold in more than one adequate public facility category. So there's, you know, greater needs that are showing there. And kind of going back to what John was talking about with the TIF and pilot, I think this kind of provides a good storyline of you're having this increased growth. Where are the current infrastructures kind of standing and supporting that future growth, and where maybe it's starting to fall down? And then what are some ways that you can structure some of that investment to pay for these infrastructure improvements, to have that in addition to those more policy, processy, you know, changes to how you look at level of service.
So the next slide, if we can jump to it.
I've got one question, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
So on that same one, the previous slide, under new park area needed, how did you identify parks?
So that is based off of the existing formula for the county's adequate public facility. So there's a certain amount of acres per person.
No, I understand the number.
So this is based off of the population projections.
Perhaps I didn't ask my question
I'm
clearly.
sorry.
So when you say park, does it have to be set up as a recreational facility, or can it just be land that's park land? You see what I mean?
Yes, active versus passive kind of green space. And yeah, so you see Chad.
For the record, Chad Williams.
Thank you, Chad.
It's really both. It's just a cumulative acreage of parkland based on the APF number.
Okay.
Where you get more distinction in the current subdivision regulations, I should say. Don't want to abbreviate for new members. Where you get into that distinction is with the transit-oriented activity center zones, to Chair Barnes's point, at our growth locations, our centers, metro stations. Then you get more need for active facilities.
Okay.
But the numbers that Courtney's team is working with is the cumulative acreage requirement, taking into consideration those two distinct factors based on a population projection.
Okay, thank you.
Good job, Courtney.
So here we get into ultimately the dollars involved in revenues and expenditures and that comparison in our last few slides here. And what we're going to present here is a revenue and expenditure ratio, which is simply the comparison of those two numbers. Any ratio greater than 1 implies more revenues associated with whether it's that land type or that location, and any ratio below 1 implies more expenditures than revenues. This we've broken down by land use type in terms of the 3 different categories we've been talking about of residential development and then the different non-residential uses. From an operating budget perspective, each of the residential uses has a ratio greater than 1, meaning it's generating more revenue than expenditures specifically associated with it. And then on the right side, you can see similarly the commercial and in particular industrial land uses have a very positive pattern as well. The industrial one has the lowest footprint from a service cost standpoint for reasons that probably are intuitive, and therefore has a kind of a strong ratio there, even though it's not necessarily super high on the revenue generating side of the equation. We have broken this up into general operations, which are a lot of the services operated by the county, and then education and library, which are primarily those school-driven costs, and then combine them in the all sources.
I have a question. How does the commercial in our county compare with other jurisdictions?
That's a great question. It's not directly addressed in this material, and I don't know that, offhand I have an answer for you. Do you mean in terms of the portion of property and value that's dedicated to commercial, or do you mean
For
in
the
terms of-
revenue.
in terms of the revenue performance of that commercial itself? You mean as like a share of the tax base?
In other words, I look around at some of the surrounding counties, for example, Montgomery County, that has a commercial tax base nearly anywhere between 70 to 75%
Yeah.
of its tax compared to Prince George's County. So what does that translate into?
Yeah. I think that's an accurate statement. Obviously, Montgomery County is not the only basis for comparison,
No, no.
but this is certainly a residential-driven county, and ultimately applies from a taxpayer standpoint. A lot of that burden is ultimately falling on the residents, and is not necessarily falling on businesses, employment centers that are operating here to the same degree that it could be. So that's something we could potentially explore more in the report, but the premise of your question, I think, is supported by the data in terms of the kind of the resident-heavy lean of the tax base.
And I might chime in with something that I think about a lot in terms of just the fiscal breakdown of land uses, and Ethan really emphasized this, is the residential, typically, you break about even, right? That's very costly, and then commercial is where you gain it. Something that separates out Prince George's is there's less people coming in for commercial reasons than a lot of your peers, right? And certainly like DC in the center. So that's certainly an opportunity. Boy, does that help tax base. Because if you have more people coming in for shopping and entertainment, now you have more commercial uses that you're able to support. Not only do you have more amenities serving the population, but that is just exactly what you would want from a fiscal tax base vantage point.
Thank you.
So if we can go to the next slide, we break down historically what we ultimately kind of term the fiscal impact from growth, and then we'll do a forward-looking version of this. So on the left, we are showing kind of the full scale of county operating revenues and expenditures, the budget of about 4.2 billion on both revenues and expenditures in 2023. Our sort of modeling and diving into different land use types and parcel level analysis has identified about 11% of operating revenues in 2023 as attributable to growth over the past 10 years. So, existing properties, parcels, locations contributed about 3.7 billion in tax revenues, and about 460 million from that new development and its uses as of 2023. On the expense side, about 9% attributable to new growth, about 360 million. So kind of a positive operating margin of about 100 million there in terms of its operating budget effects. Importantly, there is an infrastructure component as well, though. So we took infrastructure expenditures over the past decade, we annualized it down, and then we focused on really the county portion of those expenditures. Infrastructure projects are funded a number of ways, but there's federal dollars, there's state dollars, there's kind of different uses there. We really took it down to the general obligation bonds issued by the county as the representation of kind of that county cost. So the county itself is spending about 630 million a year in infrastructure projects, of which around 100 million we identified as attributable to growth and the additional infrastructure needs, service needs that come with it. So if you kind of carry all of those growth bars over to the right, those capital expenditures ultimately kind of fill that gap and ultimately kind of even out with that positive operating profile of revenues running about 100 million more than expenditures, but capital expenditures that basically offset and kind of account for that growth. And on the next slide, and happy to take questions on kind of both of these as a pair, we've got similar numbers projected forward. So, again, sort of by assumption, about 11% of operating revenue is about 460 million coming from future growth, about 360 million in additional costs, and again, about 100 million in growth-driven infrastructure costs, and again, kind of squaring there. So, one way to put this, and we'll let me actually flip to the next slide to kind of make this statement as well. And this is where we break down these same ratios, kind of these same bars, but by council district. Growth in the results of this study is not inherent positive or negative from a fiscal standpoint, right? It really depends what kind of growth. Does it require new infrastructure? Is it residential, commercial, different types within there? So some of that comes through in ratios aggregating up kind of these different council districts. So certain districts, both historically and forward-looking, have ratios greater than 1 in terms of revenues and expenditures. Others a little bit less than 1 to kind of average out to 1 over the county. One of the things that obviously correlates with that is the assessed value and kind of those housing values that are being generated and obviously vary by different districts. That is a correlative income as well. Those districts that have lower income are going to tend to see less kind of financial return from an assessed value standpoint, from an income standpoint on that development. And then the other big piece to that is school-age children, which from a residential standpoint is going to be kind of the biggest driver of some of those costs. Those ratios vary depending on what type of housing you're looking at, kind of what some of those different areas of the county look like, and it is driving some of those kind of cost differences in certain cases. I'll move to the next one, which is takeaways. This is our final slide, and then happy to kind of talk about any of this. I sort of just hit this point, but and going back to our earlier observation that the patterns are nuanced here in Prince George's County. It's not a simple story of growth is good, growth is bad in all contexts. It really depends on what are those patterns, how are they fitting with infrastructure, how and where is that growth occurring. Infrastructure planning, which Courtney talked about throughout, both from a process standpoint and then from kind of a standpoint of how well is it aligned with where that growth is happening, is obviously crucial to this fiscal picture. Development incentives, bringing either priority projects that, as John described, are catalytic, are community benefits, and we do have some recommendations, as we talked about kind of aligning the transparency and consistency with those so that the kind of development side of the market can better understand what that availability is, what that kind of proposition is. And ultimately, the function of this report is to kind of guide future growth strategy in ways that obviously meet broader planning goals, but also are fiscally sustainable, beneficial for the county. So we'll conclude there. Happy to continue to discuss, to take further questions in this meeting.
Great job, all three of you all. Thank you so much for the work that you put into this, because I believe it was definitely edifying. I think there are some focus areas that I will circle back to Chad about to kind of help strengthen your report. But I think this is great, as well as I hope it was edifying for our commissioners. Are there any other questions for this team?
You know what, I do have one. There's been a lot of controversy in the county. Well, what's your view on the data centers?
You want it? It's a controversial topic.
We're just working with Loudoun County, which has some absurdly high portion of just data centers in the country and of just the internet itself.
And how does it contribute to its economy?
And just to its economy, really positively. It's right. It's a low cost. Utilities is a real thing. There's some implications there that can be mitigated.
Sure.
But in terms of their tax base, has been very positive.
Outstanding.
Thank you.
Mr. Williams, you did a great job.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it, and thank you to my team as well.
Yep, the team as well.
I do not believe that there are any other folks to speak on this, so thank you all so much. Council has advised me of the need to schedule a special meeting of the Planning Board tomorrow to discuss and take a position on a state legislation. Schedule a special meeting of the Planning Board tomorrow to discuss and take a position on a state legislation. Please check the Planning Board website for time and how the public can view the meeting. With that being said, that concludes all items for today's agenda. I want to thank the staff and everyone for coming out today. The time is now 4:09.
Are you going to disclose your vote on Senate Bill 1005?
Time is now 4:09. The meeting is now adjourned.